What's going on, everybody? This is Fry. So today we are going to be doing a podcast talking about racism. I am joined by special guest s0ulc0ntr0ller, fellow streamer. How you doing, Soul?
Hey, what's up, Fry? How you doing, everybody?
You're doing great. All right, so here's the thing I want to talk about today is I feel like there are a lot of misunderstandings and innocent misunderstandings when it comes to racism. Could talk about this theoretically, but I'm just going to talk straight up about the recent news. The killing of George Floyd. And it just seems that there's so many people who look at that story and just see completely two different things happening. There's a lot of people, let's say in the media, where they're explaining that it was a blatant act of racism. He clearly was discriminating against him for the color of his skin, and he would have never ever done that if George Floyd had white skin. And just sort of that just being obvious that it was a racist thing. Now, there ends up being this whole other group of people that, in my opinion, innocently just look at it as like, how do you know that it's racist? Like, maybe it was, maybe the guy was a racist, maybe it wasn't. Let's look into his background. We'll see if there was anything that, any firsthand witnesses that said that, there was some evidence that it was racially motivated. They don't look at an act like that. They just don't understand why we should presume that that is a racist act. I don't think this is something really to do necessarily with the George Floyd incident. I feel like this is in general when people talk about how America is a racially systemic place and that there's just cops, there's just so much, racism happening. People are like, well, I'm not racist. I don't know anyone who's racist. I've never seen anyone do anything that is an act of racism. And there is this sort of disconnect. In my opinion, the disconnect comes from them just not having the narrative, the story, the lens that people who actually suffer from racism or people that grow up in more, let's say, diverse places with a lot of different races and have that exposure, they just don't understand the entire lens in which they sort of see life as and see America as being a racist place. And that's, I would like to invite you to maybe try to educate people who you've never experienced racism to sort of understand what it is like to live with the fear of racism constantly and to suffer from that sort of treatment. Go for it.
Okay, so
start.
So the first question,
challenge away.
About is, were the group of police officers racist or making racist actions when they were arresting George Floyd and doing it in a manner which ended up with George Floyd losing his life, right? Yeah. So me and Fry talked a little bit behind the scenes about this thing. I try to separate racism from bigotry, right? In my opinion, racism, again, is when people are preventing people from access to resources based solely on the color of their skin. Bigotry, all other actions that you don't like someone because of their culture or color of their skin kind of fall under bigotry, right? So it's tough to say that for me to point my finger and say, were they racist? I can't make that call. I'll definitely say that it was an act of bigotry when the situation was going down. And I don't think that a group of 4 white police officers would have allowed the situation to go as far as it did as soon as the person who was being arrested expressed concern for their life. If it was a 40 or 50-year-old white dude on the ground with a cop's knee on his neck and his hand on his fucking head, pinning him to the ground while they're trying to arrest this person, and that the 40 or 50-year-old white dude expressed, I can't breathe, I'm concerned for my life, in whatever form he did it, crying or screaming or moaning or using words that express that sentiment, either the arresting officer or the people around the arresting officer would have intervened at that point, and the situation would have never gone that far if it was a white dude on the ground, right?
Yeah.
So from there, moving forward, clearly, in my opinion, bigotry played a very large role in this interaction going as far as it did, and the other officers involved in the scenario not intervening.
Yeah. I want to clarify one thing, and I'm mad at myself I didn't say that before. First of all, no one is on the side of the police officer there. Anyone who even if it's not racism, it still was complete and utter negligence with the precious life of another human being. So for someone to go and do that and just be so reckless, and the guy literally said, "I can't breathe," and not take your knee off his freaking neck, and someone's yelling at him the whole time, "Take your knee off his neck," and he didn't do it. And it's just a complete recklessness with another person's life. And that is the way a lot of people look at it, is, wow, this was just this abuse of power, definitely police brutality, and again, not caring enough about the life of another person. They don't see it as it necessarily have being that race had anything to do with it. And it is true. This is the way a lot of people see it, is that theoretically, if George Floyd had white skin, this just as easily could have happened. How do you, unless we know somehow that it was racially motivated? I'm just telling you, this is where they're coming from. Because they don't, when they see something happening between someone with white skin and someone with black skin, they don't just automatically see racism or bigotry, as you're calling it. They don't see that it's a race thing at all, because they don't have experience with racism. They don't have experience with that kind of discrimination in their life.
Absolutely right. So I've never spent a day as a police officer, but my opinion is that police officers do start to adapt an elitist mentality, where they fall into this scenario where they believe that their life is more valuable, a police officer's life and fellow police officers' life is more valuable than any other civilian, right? And fearing for their life allows them,
well, that's everyone, by the way,
whatever amount of force is necessary. Then it's like they separate all the other people they interact with in two categories. There's the good people and then the them, right? And I think it's a lot easier for a group of white police officers to interact with people from other cultures, more easily fall in the them category, rather than the good people who we're going to try to slow down, have some empathy in a situation, figure out what's going on, right? Everybody else that's them, we're allowed to brutalize and take whatever measure we feel appropriate in the moment.
See, I agree with you. I'll definitely concede to you that it's more likely for people to treat someone of a different skin color as the them, or to see them as a threat. Like, I understand that, but I don't see, based on that statistic, that increased likelihood, why one particular situation we necessarily know that was even a factor. Like, I think it could have been, but it could also not been. So let's reserve judgment until we see more evidence. Like, why should we presume that it was, if it easily could have had nothing to do with race?
Well, back up. How is there even a group of four white guys with authority involved with arresting what are they doing patrolling in a black neighborhood? Why are there no other minority representation involved in that scenario? Well, that doesn't seem awkward to you?
I mean, let's say in that neighborhood, let's say there was equal to the distribution of the entire population in Minneapolis. That was the equal distribution of how many police officers in that neighborhood were white and how many were black. Like, would that make it any better?
I absolutely think that it would have played a factor. If there was let's just say there's 4 officers involved, right? 2 of them are minorities, 2 of them are white guys. I don't think the situation plays out the same way.
Again, I understand that that's how you see it, but you could understand also when someone says, first of all, I think one of them was Asian. One of the guys definitely was Asian. Just to clarify, it doesn't matter though. Yeah, but you're saying if there were black police officers that it would have played out differently, and a lot of people will say, well,
I would hope that.
Well, I don't know.
I would.
People will say people will say that. I think the problem, again, there's 2 problems here. You had the officer with his knee on the guy's neck who was being reckless with someone else's life. Then you have the other 3 who aren't doing anything to stop. I feel like that's like some kind of, I don't know police culture that much, but I think that's some kind of like fraternity thing where you always stand up for each other, and if people are yelling at you, you kind of like trying to like hush. Then you always like, you know, we are for our own. I think, and that is a problem because there has to be more accountability. But I see that as been the problem. How do you know that race was a factor? Like, if that had happened to someone who was white, let's say George Floyd had been a white person, you're saying that would never happen. But let's say that would happen, that you would have a person who is reckless with another person's life. And again, police have this elitist mentality that there's us and them. For whatever reason, they categorize some white person, some person with white skin as a them. And he kneeled on his neck until he died, and other people didn't do anything to stop him. He takes his knee off and he's like, shit, this guy's dead. So with that, race is obviously not a factor there. That could you agree with me that that could happen.
And that's still a case of police brutality. Does it bother you that in your mind there's a what if scenario where a group of white cops could, whether they meant to or not, end a person's life while taking them in custody, and there not be so much public backlash against police brutality in this what if scenario?
Again, I don't think there would be, and it happens to be that there's several hundred white people who are killed by the police every single year in America. There's twice as many. It's disproportionate in terms of how many people white skin there are and people black skin there are in America right now, but there are twice as many people with white skin who get killed by police every single year than there are black people. So you're right. People will hear that and they will reserve judgment, because they'll do the same thing. They'll say, well, was it police brutality or was it not? If someone captured on camera this thing where the guy had a knee in his neck, it wouldn't have blown up like it is now because of the race thing. The race thing is what made this blow up. But it would have been on, someone would have sent that to the news and they would have said, dude, that was police brutality. The guy literally just killed someone. Again, it would have, what's happening in America right now would not have happened with if it was a white guy. But there would be backlash for sure.
Even in the numbers you're citing shows that there is a clear bias against race, right? 14% of America is black.
Right.
There are 4 times as many white people than there are black people in this country. So statistically, police should kill 4 times more white guys than they kill black guys. But they only kill twice as many white guys as black guys. So that right in the numbers that you threw out there. And again, we're not like, we don't have facts, verifiable facts on deck where we can scroll around and then, copy links, post links in the chat, or this is the numbers about this.
You can look it up. You can look, anyone can Google this thing. How many people by race are killed by police?
You cited that shows that police involvement among black people results in higher deaths than what is statistically represents what's walking around.
That according to that statistic, I 100% agree with you, and we can suggest that of that disproportionate amount, that difference that people with black skin are being killed disproportionately by police, we can presume, let's say even we'll presume some of those was due to racism, but there was the portion that it is proportionate to white people, and that, let's say, you'll agree with me, did not have to do with racism, right? If we would take 13% of the population, so let's say 13% of the amount of white people who are killed by police every year are black people killed by police, and it has nothing to do with racism. It's the exact same circumstances as it would have been if the person had been white-skinned. Would you at least agree with me on that? That some black people being killed by cops is not due to racism?
If the numbers tracked, then it would be a lot more difficult to make that assumption, right? If those numbers tracked, where 4 times more white guys were killed by police than black people or minorities were killed by police, then it would be so much harder to say, police brutality is absolutely a problem, but police brutality against minorities is a much more glaring fucking problem.
I agree with you. So again, to go based on those statistics, you don't need someone to get killed by the police in order to have those statistics. You know what I mean? You don't need an incident like George Floyd for that. So I'll agree with you. If we go and we present those statistics on the table and say, hey, there's clearly a problem happening, let's do something about it, I'm all for it. But to take one incident of one particular case of a person with black skin getting killed by police and say that was necessarily racism, it could have been, and it's part of the general problem, so there's room for concern. I think everyone realizes that point, but they don't get to that next level where it definitely was an act of bigotry.
The public outrage is not only in response to this one incident, right? It's in response to a long line of Michael Brown, Tamir Rice, Philando Castile, Trayvon Martin, right? There's a long, and I feel so guilty that I'm leaving out the other 15 names of minorities that were killed in cases, clear cases of police overreach and police excessive use of force. And then the 200 other names who don't even reach the media that I'm not even aware of. The public response to it is not only this one incident, right? And it's largely in part due to this one incident, but it's not only that. Like, how you cannot identify that, it's like you can't separate that the protests are about police brutality. They were sparked because of the incident that happened in the recent zeitgeist of the culture, but people are protesting what's been going on for 20 years, 50 years, 100 years.
Yeah. See, again, even in the way of looking, the people who don't think that George was the incident with George Floyd was necessarily an act of racism, they still see there being a general problem with police brutality, and they'll even recognize that there is more police brutality against people minorities. They just have a hard time saying that case is like, they'll recognize too that that's what the protests are about. People don't have a problem with the protests about police brutality or that race is an issue, but they don't. When people start saying that, when the news and the New York Times dubs it as a clear act of racism, they're just like, how the heck do you? It feels like a fake story to them, because how did they know?
Why is that your focal point? Why is your focal point on what a New York Times article is, and not that there's 50,000 people in multiple cities around the world standing up against this shit?
Even that, I gave the New York Times as a clear example, but because it's so like clearly printed in the newspaper. But this really does apply to the protest as a whole, because again, when people, and they might be making a mistake, and tell me if this is a mistake, when people see that incident spark protest about general racism, they presume that the narrative is that was a racist act. Like, that's or else why now are you doing this when there was a white guy who killed a black guy? Why isn't it any time that someone gets killed by the police? If it was just about police brutality, what was so special about this story?
Okay, so here's maybe what I'm struggling with, right? Does it bother you that there was not protests against other acts of police brutality, and that there happens to be a protest about this particular act? Like, I don't understand why that would upset you.
It doesn't. That fact doesn't upset me. I'm not saying I'm upset by it.
There's public outrage against an act of police brutality.
See, that doesn't upset me. I'm not saying that the fact there's being public awareness is something. In fact, I think it's a great thing. I think there's a problem and it needs to be fixed. And that video, the reason why we're able to take this story, besides for the racist thing, the reason we're able to use this as a great example of police brutality is because the whole thing was just on video, and it was so blatantly negligent with the life of another human. I mean, there was something about this story that is very hard to even see two sides of it. You know what I mean? In terms of how the officer was clearly in the wrong. I think but again, that is in terms of making the message about police brutality, not in terms of making the message about racism as a whole, and especially one about Black Lives Matter, which is much more about racism and a lot. I don't know. I guess it's a mix between race and police brutality. It's actually true. I'm not correct on that.
Clearly, based on the numbers that you cited previously, where Black people are disproportionately victims of police brutality.
Right.
This is where Black Lives Matter finds a point to inject themselves into the fucking conversation, because clearly this needs to be addressed.
Again, that's
at least to us, because this affects us.
I think part of I think that, okay, so if are you saying that the incident with George Floyd was not necessarily racially motivated, but since it definitely could have been, since that could have been a factor, that's the reason why this is being used as an opportunity to create awareness? Sorry for asking a trapping question. I know I'm asking a hard question.
This is what I think about the scenario. When the police officers involved in the incident began the incident, no one of them intended on killing another human, regardless if that human was fucking white, black, purple, you know what I mean, green, blue, whatever, right? But once the event started in motion, there was no interference or nothing that stopped the end result. And the end result, it is what it is. And the people involved in the end result need to be held accountable for what happened. Now, if you look at this one isolated incident against the backdrop of clearly by the numbers, and we brown people, we know from our experience uh how interactions with the police tend to fucking go, right?
Yeah.
But look at the just the numbers that say there's far more cases of police excessive use of force and excessive brutality against minorities. Now, the minority population and the adjacent white culture who doesn't approve of these type of actions are now getting together to try to gain more attention to the issue by protesting, by marching, by interrupting traffic, by creating public awareness of the issue through social media platforms and physically going out and making noise and doing things, right? That is a great thing. How the media portrays that is not, the people involved in protest and the people involved in change are not as hung up on how the media portrays it as it seems like you are. Like the focus for you seems to be, well, the media spinning it in a way that I don't personally agree with, so I'm going to put all my mental energy in assessing this issue. Meanwhile, there's this giant fucking problem over here.
Well,
That's what we should be
first of
fucking
all,
focused
don't
on.
put that on me, because I was very, very clear when I started asking
Okay,
this question that this is about me trying to understand the lens, not of the media. I don't care, by the way. They are financially motivated to make the world the scariest place possible because then more people watch the news. I don't give any credence to any big media corporation for that very reason. They're always going to spin things off. But for me, the point was I want to understand the perspective that other people clearly have, that it just, I feel like there's a lot of people need to sort of see the lens through the eyes of someone who lives in a racist world, because a lot of people, they just don't feel like they're living in that world.
Let me propose a scenario for you. Fry, do you drive?
Yeah.
Fry, you're driving, right?
Yeah.
You are sober. You are in a rush to get from point A to point B. You happen to be driving 10 miles over the speed limit, right? Yeah. You get pulled over. You
never happened.
Police
Yeah,
goes under sirens. Yeah, you pull over like you're supposed to, like a responsible city. You find a safe place to do it. You pull over. Police officer gets behind you, has his lights and hazards on. You're on the side of the highway.
Yeah.
Are you at any point during the pending interaction with the police worried that your life could end?
See, interaction? Honestly, I don't think it's very likely. I would probably be careful, keep my hands on the steering wheel, because I do hear about what goes on at traffic stops, and when people reach for their license, the police get stared. So even though white skin, I would be keeping my hands on the steering wheel just like anyone else would. But I do not think, you're right, I do not actually look at that as a situation where my life could end. There's any significant chance of my life ending. You're right.
Do you think, I don't even know what was the cause of George Floyd's interaction with the police. Right?
A shop owner called the police because he thought that their money counter had flagged one of the bills that he had paid with as being counterfeit. It ended up actually being a mistake. The machine flagged a good bill because it had a crease or whatever it was, but that's so he called the police. That was what he thought was the right thing to do.
Fry, if you were in a store and you bought some items, and the shopkeeper or the store clerk, whoever it is, slides the pen over one of your $20 bills and it doesn't turn the right color, and they call the police thinking that you have a counterfeit note, are you afraid that that pending police interaction, like you're probably, I know me as a person, I'm not going to run away from the scenario. Look, you think one of my bills is fake? Fine. You want to call the cops? Call the cops. I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to be here till the police show up and the situation is going to be resolved, right? Because I'm a citizen. I'm not really worried about it. But I don't want to say I'm not worried about it, but I know that I wouldn't actively be running around trying to fucking spend counterfeit money.
Right.
Now, would you ever, in that scenario, would you ever be afraid of your life ending?
Again, I don't think I would have any significant fear of my life ending in that scenario.
Okay. Well, a large percentage of, like, I'm a minority, right? The way I personally would not be afraid of my life ending in that scenario, but based on the statistics, it's clearly possible. Right? Because of the way I handle myself and the way I interact with police officers, I'm pretty sure I would be able to diffuse the scenario while it was going on. Right? The outcome may not have went in my favor and may not ended with me just walking away.
I'd be afraid of that too. I would be afraid of that too. I know people, they just jump to conclusions. They might think I just did it. I don't know. Right. But you're saying that a lot of people have this
scenario that George Floyd is in. How does he end up dead?
I don't actually know the full details of how it got from there to him being on the ground. I don't know what the thing was. A lot of stuff wasn't on camera. I actually haven't looked into the play-by-play of how he got from the store to the thing, but he got arrested, and he had a negligent police officer who is does not care enough about another human being's life, take his freaking knee and put it on the guy's neck until the guy suffocated, and he wouldn't even listen to him when he said I can't. He probably even heard him say I can't breathe, and was like, yeah, you'll be fine. Like complete negligence with the life of another human being.
All right, now
I don't see the race. I don't see that as a factor necessarily.
Hold on. Yeah. Do you see a scenario where there's a 40 or 50-year-old white guy who gets accused of spending a fake bill at a store, and sticks around for the police to respond to the shop owner's call, or the store clerk's call to address the situation? Do you see there's a scenario where there's 4 white cops that are involved in this scenario where the white guy ends up on the ground with his knee on his neck and complains about fearing that he's going to die from the way that the police are treating him, and a white guy actually dying from this? Does that even seem like it's a feasible possibility?
My answer is no. And if 1 month ago, before this thing happened, if you would have said that same story, but it would have been someone with black skin, I also would have said no. I was like, he calls the police because he thought a note was fraudulent, and the guy ends up dying. I would have been like, well, it's possible. I would say it's possible for a white person too, but I would say in all likelihood, in both those scenarios, I think that's extremely unlikely, and it is extreme. I mean, it is, obviously. It's not most of the time. Someone gets picked up for a $20 bill and they fucking die. It's probably 1 out of a million. You know what I mean?
The life experience of minorities in this country clearly is opposite. It is completely possible that police could end up taking our life over some interaction where we're even innocent. Whether we're guilty or the level of guilt is assessed or not, or we're completely innocent in the situation that caused police involvement, we can end up dead, and the police officers involved in the shit face no repercussions.
So
serious repercussions.
So bring me in. What experiences
fired from their job?
Yeah. What experiences in your life have led you to look at the world through that lens? That's what I want to know. I feel like there must be a lot of background to that, because it's not just your skin color. Okay, well, it's not the statistic. The statistic, it's not like you read the statistic and all of a sudden now you're afraid. There must have been a lot of things that happened to make you have that fear.
Now, me personally, no. I've had
or people that you know, people you love.
Amount of police involvement, but the people that I grew up around and the people I associate with, the minorities of the people that I associate with, have far more tragic stories about police involvement to relate than the white people I interact with.
Okay, so I'm going to try to empathize, because this is what I'm trying to do right now. I'm going to try to imagine that I have had a lot of friends, and they have an identifiable quality, which is that they're a minority, they have a different skin color, it's not white, and that those people have clearly, to me, people I really care about, have had just so many horrible incidents with police being scared of them for no reason, using force with them for when it's really not necessary. Just suspecting them of things that they never did. Is this the sort of thing you're talking about? Suspecting them of things that there's just no evidence for at all? Or that once a police officer steps out of bounds, that just nothing happens. They file a complaint and just nothing happens, and the police officer gets off the hook. Is that the kind of thing you're saying?
Let's take it a step further, right? I personally have had police draw weapons on me because for no real reason, they felt a fear for their own safety. And
can you tell me about that? Do you feel comfortable talking about that story?
When I was 15, I had a 16-year-old friend. He had an older girlfriend. She had a car. We used to drive her car all the time, right? So we were out with her car, and his little brother was in the back seat. So I'm in the passenger seat. I'm 15. His little brother's like maybe 12 or 13 years old, right? We were in a Honda Accord, tinted windows. You can see in, but it's a little bit difficult. But clearly, car has rims, has a system, right? So police probably had been behind us for a block or two before they pulled us over. Heard loud music coming from the vehicle. We smoked weed in the car frequently, but not that day, right? So when police approached the driver's side window, a pair of cops came out of the police vehicle. The initial one that pulled us over, and then another squad car responded almost immediately, right? So, but we ended up with 3 police officers outside the vehicle with pistols pointed in the car before my friend who was driving the vehicle had even rolled down the driver's side window. So we weren't doing anything crazy,
What?
right? The police officers, when we finally start talking to them, after a while they felt a little bit more comfortable. But before they asked for license, registration, anything like that, they already have pistols pointed at the fucking car, and it's just 3 black kids in a newer car.
Yeah. So let's again. They didn't know who was in the car. Why did they pull you over? Like, what were they worried about? Just because you had rims on the car? Like, there's been something more to it than that.
The police officers said that they were called by somebody else to respond to a vehicle that was involved in something else. I don't remember the complete story.
And it matched the description of your car.
No, the vehicle didn't even match the description of the vehicle that the police were saying was involved in the thing. The police just thought they saw something that matched the description. Really,
so
they
for some reason had a misunderstanding with whoever was in dispatch, and they thought that this car that they're seeing, which is a few kids inside, matches the description of a car which they legitimately should have pulled over because it had been involved in an incident.
Yes.
So they go again. I'm just telling you the way someone who's not looking at through the perspective of you. I'm going to tell you just the way I look at the story. Now, then you're going to bring me in. You're going to bring me into your side. I'm going to say, well, if there's potentially, if they flag this car as one that was flagged as some kind of violent incident happened, when they approach the car, they should definitely have their pistols out, because if you have people involved in a violent incident, it's very likely that they're going to need to be armed for that situation. They don't know who's in the car. Like, why? What does this have to do with?
Understandable.
I'm just bring me in.
My boy's girlfriend, who's the owner of the vehicle, drives the car for far more often than we're ever in the vehicle. Right? She operates it a lot more. She gets far more tickets than me or my boy ever did. She can never once tell me an interaction where a police officer approached her vehicle with a pistol out. And not one time does a cop walk up to her, or a group of police officers walk up to her vehicle with weapons drawn.
But again, if she had been,
do you think it's a coincidence?
Well, if she had been driving a car which got tagged in the exact same incident that they thought matched a vehicle, then they would have approached it with their guns drawn. It doesn't matter that they couldn't even see inside. They couldn't even see inside.
One isolated incident. No, you can see inside the vehicle. It's just not easy to.
Right. So it was tinted. Whatever it is, they.
So I mean, look, one isolated incidents you want to write off as it's just a coincidence.
Okay. Well, let me try to understand what you're saying. You're saying that if that happens once, if that's the thing you hear, and you're not constantly involved in situations like that, it's not like a frequent thing you hear about, then it's a lot easier to write it off as a coincidence. But someone who is frequently involved with that, or people they know, their friends, it just keeps on happening where there's just so many times that minorities are being pulled over for, I don't know if the story you said was necessarily for no reason, but it just happens so much more often that when something happens enough times, there's only so many times a coincidence can happen. So there's a certain point where it breaks that threshold that's no longer a coincidence in the story of your life.
I'm so glad you said that.
Is that what you're saying?
I'm so glad you said that. Yes. So the outrage and the public reaction to the George Floyd scenario is this is a black dude who was accused of spending of counterfeit bill. 4 police officers respond to this, and the black dude ends up dead.
Yeah.
How many times do scenarios like this need to happen before we can clearly say that there is bigotry? Bigotry plays a large role in the way the scenario played out, and it's time for change.
Okay, I gotcha. So again, it's not that you've already told me that it's not necessarily the officer involved. That particular case was racist, but you're not looking at that particular case. I think this is really the disconnect. People who just hear about this thing on the news and they see okay, this thing happened, and then there's the protest. Yeah, they hear that this is a general problem and it's happening a lot, and there's a lot of police brutality, but they don't see everything as one package. They see it as being the George Floyd thing, and they see justice for Floyd. They're not realizing that this incident is actually, I'm not going to say it's irrelevant because it's part of the problem, but it's not the main. I guess it's not as important. It's not as connected to the protest as they think. Floyd. What?
The people that are out protesting right now are not only protesting because of George Floyd.
Yeah.
That might be the rallying call and the common chant that's presented, right? That's the issue that's on the forefront of their minds, but they're not only out protesting George Floyd. The other named organizations, for instance, Black Lives Matter, their involvement in it is, yes, they're there to support the protests, but again, they're protesting police brutality. George Floyd is just the most recent incident that caught enough people's attention to get enough people mobilized to do something.
Gotcha. I gotcha. Do you think that most people who are protesting would agree with you and I that it wasn't necessarily, that George Floyd incident wasn't necessarily an act that was racially driven, but rather that it is a representation of many acts which statistically should be presumed are racially driven? Would you say most people don't actually think it's necessarily
not the people protesting? The people on the sidelines who are refusing to do anything and will stand by and watch the long string of this behavior happen and continue to happen. Those people might try to take this one incident and try to discount it as a coincidence that the 4 cops happen to be white and the dead guy happened to be brown. But the people that are protesting, absolutely, if they're motivated enough to get out in the street and do something, no, they're not looking at it like, oh, this one isolated incident, we're not 100% sure if it's racially motivated or not. They're protesting the history of this. Now, while they're out in the moment of protesting, all fall under the unified support of the George Floyd. You know what I mean? Like their rallying cry is justice for George Floyd, or whatever derivation of that they're chanting in the moment. But no, they're not looking at this as, we don't have all the facts. Let's wait and see what happens. Let's wait and see what more information is presented about how the scenario played out. Right. And the only people who truly are looking at the scenario like that are people who aren't there. In my opinion, they may not approve of these type of actions happening, but because it's not happening to people close to them and people that they interact with, they don't feel it necessary for them to be involved.
They don't recognize how big of a problem it is.
Well, no, it's not that. The problem doesn't affect them.
Interesting.
It doesn't affect the people that they care about.
That's a keen judgment. I feel like that probably could apply to some people. I'm very reluctant to say that applies to everyone who doesn't, just because they don't have it affect to them. It's not that they don't care about anyone besides for themselves. I think a lot of people, it's just because they don't understand this narrative of people actually suffering a lot from police brutality. It's not necessarily because they don't care, it's because they don't know. But that'll be a difference in opinion that we have. But didn't you say a moment ago that the incident with George Floyd was not necessarily, that officer was not necessarily racially motivated? Didn't you agree with me on that?
I do not think that when the 4 police officers that initially responded to the scenario, I don't think they intended to kill a brown guy when they showed up. But once the thing started happening, I I I do not think that if it was a white guy who was accused of spending counterfeit money, he would have ended up dead
Okay,
because of the way
you're
the
saying
police interact in the scenario.
you're certain that the color of his skin played a role in his death. You're certain that that was the case.
I am certain that these types of police interactions are happening at such a rate that there's no way that I'll say that race was not a factor. Race absolutely is a factor here.
I feel like
in my opinion.
I feel like
right?
that.
So now I'm
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I feel like that does clear it up. I feel like that's. It's like it happens enough. If you're just a person who doesn't experience racism and you see it on the news, this one incident, and you don't have your life narrative, you don't incorporate this into an entire life story, then you're able to see as a coincidence. But if it's part of a life story, it's not a coincidence.
That you only see one racial incident a year. What news? Are you not watching the news?
I don't watch the news a lot at all, to be honest.
For the last 10 years,
mainstream media, I watch Inside Edition. That's the news I watch. I don't watch any of these big corporations because I think they all suck. I like Inside Edition because they seem to take a balanced view on things. I don't. If we would look in Inside Edition though, again, that's only the last few months I watched them. Probably before that, this year I haven't been watching news at all. I've been busy. There's times I watch the news a lot. Usually when this stuff is happening, I watch the news a lot. And when there's not that much chaos and stuff, I'm usually watching the news less. Right when COVID started, I was watching the news then.
So before
not
COVID,
even that much though. Actually,
you weren't aware of prominent cases in the media where excessive police brutality ended with a brown person losing their life.
I was aware of it. I for sure was aware of it.
Okay, so I don't see. From the way you just presented this scenario, right? I don't see how you're not making the connection.
Well, I'll tell you why.
Stopping you from making the
connection? Because I'll tell you why. I know that there's a lot of people with white skin killed by police and a lot of people with brown skin killed by police. And the way I look at it, the way a lot of people look at it, is that each incident is its own isolated incident. They don't look at it as a trend. That in order to see something as a trend, you have to have a story that connects them. For me, it's like do I think most police officers are racist? I don't know. If I'm not under that presumption, it's very hard for me to say that every single time I see someone who's a minority get killed by the police, that it's because of this generalized police racism. It could be that race did not play a factor in those, and it could be that police officer involved was racist, but it's not a general police problem.
Okay, but to begin with this, you threw out the generalized statistic that police brutality ends in the loss of life as twice as many white people as it does brown people, right? That means 1/3 of the cases of police brutality ending in a loss generally ends up with a brown person dead.
Right.
And then
1/3. Well,
before then we
slightly
know that
less, but
13% of the population.
It's half, twice as many
black people.
It's twice as many white people get killed as black people each year. So it's disproportionate to the population.
1/3 of these cases are black, but only 13-14% of the population is black.
Right.
Right there's a giant disparity that you're willing to overlook or not even take the time to realize is a problem.
Well, that's not true, because I've looked into this and I've heard a lot of different explanations for that. And as a person, again, who doesn't have that sensitivity that you have, and I've had so few interactions with police officers. I've had just a few. I don't know which of the stories are true, and I don't know the only way I can determine that is by hearing what other people say.
Get into that. I have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Do you talk to people who tell you that the brown people are making a bigger deal out of police brutality than what their experience actually is.
I typically don't hear that from like friends or people close to me. I do see sometimes internet personalities suggesting that maybe that people, you're asking if do they say people of color are making a big deal of it for no reason?
Do you think the black people are lying about this shit? Do you think we're making up that the police are overly brutalizing us and getting away with it? Do you think we're pulling this out of our ass?
Well, certainly not. Because I'll tell you the thing. I'm going to talk about a generalized topic now. And it has nothing necessarily to do with this case and race. It's just a thing I do in general. If a person comes and says, I am in pain, I am suffering, I feel hurt, I feel discriminated against, I listen and I believe them when it comes about their feeling. But the moment they point their finger and blame another person or another organization for that, it's not that I completely discount. I try to still understand and still hear their perspective, but I'm very, very critical about it because everyone does that. I mean, there's literally, you have all these people in the United States who feel like they're suffering, they don't have a job, and they're pointing their finger at illegal immigrants and saying their fault. Whenever someone points their finger, I go and say, oh, I believe your story and your feelings, but I'm not going to jump to the conclusion when you just because you're pointing fingers at someone else that it's their fault. So that's the way I look at this too. Do I feel that people are suffering? Do I feel that people are suffering from racism? Yes. But once you point your finger at the whole police organization as a whole, I'm going to say, present me with evidence. Not that I'm discounting it, but I need more than that to believe you.
Okay. Well said. Critical thinking skills, I think, are sorely lacking in today's culture. It's good that you'll take the time to at least try to parse the data and then form your own opinion, right?
Okay.
But
thank you.
Now, I would love to hear what you had prepared. I'd love to hear about because it almost like you put yourself in a position where you're going to have to tell us about other times police brutality involved in the loss of life of a brown person. So let's hear about these other cases that you studied.
Oh, I wasn't going to talk about other individual cases. I was going to give other arguments, and these are all philosophical things, just ways of looking at things that account for the difference in disproportionality of how much people with black skin are killed by police in proportion to how much white skin are killed. And everyone agrees that it is disproportionate. There is one viable explanation that is just racism accounts for that entire disproportionality, but there are other theories out there of reasons why the statistics are skewed. And this is not things that, again none of these things are good.
Is the better word than racism for this particular topic.
Okay, but it's racially motivated. I'll try to do that because there's our different definitions, but it's because of racial bias. Is the difference. And again, none of these things about that. I want to be really clear here. So do not come. I'm gonna get misquoted, of course. None of these things are something that I am sure and I'm confident that this makes up the difference between why people of color are disproportionately killed compared to the population by police. But these are just theories, which I also do not know how to completely discount. And that is why one of the reasons why I invited you onto this podcast is so you can help us understand whether or not these are even viable, and if they are easily discountable, how so. All right, here's one thing I hear people say, is that because of income inequality, and we can even presume that income inequality is due to racial bias. Yeah, let's even say that the entire difference between the incomes of let's say people with white skin, people with black skin is just because of discrimination of one sort or the other. Even if that was because of discrimination, what ends up as a result is that you have more poor black people in proportionate to the population than there are white people. So, and you also know that if instead of dividing the statistics of people who are killed by police into black skin versus white skin, if you would instead separate it in between people who are poor under a certain income or over a certain income, the people who are under a certain income get killed way, way disproportionate to their numbers in their population because they end up having a disproportionate amount of interactions with police. So maybe it's not. So this is what some people say, is that maybe the reason why the disproportionate number of black people get killed by police is not because the policemen are actually racist. It's because people with black skin have unfortunately disproportionately are poor in America.
Okay. So here's the thing I think you're overlooking with a statement like that.
Go
right?
for it.
What would you, to give a broad number, what would you say is the number of Americans who live below the poverty line?
So I actually did Google this right before. I can't say, I'm going to say a source that came up. I'm not going to be able to verify this because I haven't really, I don't actually know how to verify these things, but I'll read the statistics right now. This is poverty rate, and I have it by, in general, I have it by race and ethnicity. So according to this, it's the kff.org. Don't know anything about it, so please don't harass me if these statistics are wrong, but let's just use these as theoretical numbers. In the United States, 9% of the white population are beneath the poverty line, and 22% of the black population are under the poverty line.
Do you know that 9% of the poor white people is more people than the entire black American population?
Well, if 9% is more than the amount, okay, you're throwing some numbers at me. I'm not crunching the numbers immediately. But if you're saying,
okay,
what percentage of the United States population has white skin?
That's a tough question to really put your finger on. We need the next census to roll in as accurately as possible, but let's throw the number 60 out there.
60%.
330 million Americans, right? 60% of those are white.
130, 000, 000. And it would be times 0.6. 60%, let's say, are white. And of that, 9%. So it's going to be times 0.09.
And I also I think that's a gross inaccurate number.
Let's say it is. But okay, so now it's 17.8 million poor white people.
17.8 million.
According to that calculation. And let's say we would do 17.8. So let's say we would do the same thing. We would do 330 330 million times 0.13. That's the amount of black people that are in America. And of those, 22%. So we're going to multiply that times 0.22. It turns out there are 9.4 million poor people.
So the number of poor white people is twice as the estimate of the number of white people living under the poverty line in America is, that population is twice as large as the number of black people living under the poverty line.
Under the poverty line, right?
Okay, so now continue with this. Because the black people are poor, they interact with the police more.
Unfortunately,
there's twice as many poor white people,
dude,
that commit the same crimes against poverty.
I know, and unfortunately, there's exactly twice as many white people get killed by police as black people in America. So according to this calculation, racism doesn't play a factor at all. I almost hear the bump. I'm sorry to do that, but according to this calculation, police racism is not a factor whatsoever. It's actually exactly the amount of correlation of poor people to not poor people.
I gotta fucking type numbers in.
Do it yourself. Don't rely on me. I could have screwed it up. I could have added a zero somewhere.
Well, I think that the problem here really is 20% is really the better estimate of the number of poor white Americans.
And how many then how many then for black Americans?
I mean, I've seen estimates that 50% of all Americans live close or under the poverty line.
See, again, it depends where, because again, as you get lower and lower, the crime, I think, does go up to a certain point where the people are literally just like living on the street, and then it goes down maybe. I think, but where you draw the poverty line is subjective, but there's definitely underneath a certain ceiling, crime definitely does go up. We'll agree on that.
All right. So what is the rest of the statement?
So
Let's fully unpack this whole statement.
so what they're suggesting is that really police racial bias is not a factor. It's not the reason, at least for all of the disparity, or if not at all, the reason for the disparity between why disproportionately people with black skin are killed more compared to their population than people with white skin, but rather it's just because, unfortunately, there's a lot more poverty in the black community, which again, it could be because of racial bias, because of racism, according to your definition of them not having enough resources, and we should do something to solve that. But attacking the police as being racist is not the correct response.
Okay.
How are the numbers adding up
to
to
you? A little bit lost in this. All right, so
did the numbers first of all? Did the numbers come out to you similar to the way that we calculate that when I calculated it?
Yeah, using the estimate that only 9% of whites in America live at the poverty line, which I want to reject that stat right there.
You think it's more or less?
Absolutely, it's at least double that.
But then would you also double the fact that, let's say, of black people it's 22%? Would you double that as well?
No, I wouldn't. If you're going to say half the black people are poor, but only a fifth of the white people live at the poverty line, I don't think that's accurate either.
Wouldn't you say that you would agree that there's a disproportionate amount of black people who are poor, more than their population compared to white people, though? You would agree that it's definitely a higher percentage.
Yeah. Yes. Where exactly the numbers fall for that, though, I don't know.
Again, if someone wanted to look at the statistic and said, fine, we need to try to help minorities and lift them out of poverty by creating more opportunities for them, there's no one can disagree with that. You know what I mean? I think everyone would be right there.
Saying that.
I think Donald Trump is right there too, to be honest. You know what I mean? He at least claims he is. You know what I mean? He at least his rhetoric. Yeah. You're saying it's not genuine, but again, everyone, at least in the way they talk, will agree we want there to be less poor people, and particularly we should be focusing on minorities who have a disproportionate amount of poor people, and we should try to do whatever we can, to make the situation better. So, but I don't. Again, but when people go and look at that statistic and they say it's necessarily because of race, it kind of gets them back into the whole thing where a lot of people, they'll see a statistic quoted and one possible or incident happen and one possible explanation is racism, but not necessarily. So let's be super diligent and see if there's other explanations that actually explain it better. Like, I feel like we possibly
what's the next explanation? We kind of muddied the waters too much.
Okay.
But
we'll move on.
But I mean, I'd like to say that there's definitely some grains of truth in the scenario that you presented with the first one.
Okay, amazing. All right. Okay, this is gonna get much more. This is gonna be a real tough one. And again, I wanna again stay, even though I already said it for all these questions. These are not my opinions. These are things that people are suggesting philosophically. And I just want to hear why these things should be necessarily discounted. Okay, this is not going to be talking about the number of people that are killed by police. This is actually going to be focusing much more on why there is income inequality in the United States. Average, I do actually have this statistic that the average income of black families, on average, is significantly lower than that of white skin families. So. The thing that some people suggest is that it's not necessarily due to racism or racial discrimination of white people towards black people. It's rather a cultural difference. And the biggest proof to that is the fact that Asian Americans of Asian descent make significantly higher average household income than white people do, and they have definitely been the recipients of a lot of racism, a lot of discrimination. I mean, people back, especially in World War II, they were called everyone, even someone from China was called a Jap, and there has been that sort of discrimination. But that didn't play a factor for them. In fact, there was something about their culture, about being super, like I don't want to be confirming any stereotypes, but there's something about the culture which makes them very, very strict and disciplined and very like that makes them end up having a higher average income. So maybe there's differences between in culture that make it that, not to point fingers and not to blame anyone, not even necessarily say it's a bad thing that a certain skin color has less money. That it's not even a blame, even derogatory, but just say that that would maybe cultural differences account for the difference in average income between, let's say, white people and black people. The same way cultural difference probably could very easily account the difference between white people and Asian people.
Okay. So I don't want to just grant that that's actually a thing, right? The way you're framing it, definitely a little bit loaded. But what white America tends to overlook is that it was illegal for black people to know how to read in this country for over 150 years. If
Yeah.
you knew how to read, it was a crime.
Right.
So if there are cultural differences in if there how do I phrase this the right way? If there are differences in educational goals ingrained in a culture, let's not forget that that was a thing.
So you're saying that, let's say the I don't want to put words in your mouth, but are you suggesting that maybe the reason why, let's say, there's fewer black kids graduating high school than there are white kids is because it was illegal for black people to learn how to read when slavery was a thing?
But black people, and this is even after slavery ended, right? Black people were prevented access in this country to higher levels of education for for a century after fucking slavery ended.
Okay.
Right? So if you want to point at, black people just don't care enough to make a lot of money, let's not forget that black people weren't allowed the tools to make a lot of money for 200 years, over 200 years in this country.
Okay, so you're
Where
saying that
white families,
you're saying
you
culture.
it's much more common for a white family to come from a long line of doctors than it is for a black person to come from a black family that has 6 generations of doctors.
That's definitely
or 4
true.
generations of police officers,
is certainly true.
or 3 generations of politicians, or 5 generations of military officers,
or just 6 generations of people pilots who knew how to read and write. Like, that's much more likely for white people.
Or even if they didn't know how to read or write, 3 generations of people who had low skill level, high wage earning jobs, like were union construction workers,
yeah,
or participated in local government,
yeah,
or were college professors.
Right. So again, but that would, according to what you're saying, still, it would then really take the pressure of us presuming that current day in 2020 there is systemic racism now, and it would say everyone knows there used to be systemic racism in America, and that past those previous, what was the Southern laws? What were they called? I don't even remember. They called Brown, something like that.
Jim Crow.
Jim Crow. Sorry, I'm sorry that eluded my mind. That everyone knows there was systemic racism in the past in America, but what people are trying to say with this is that there's not necessarily now, but there is still remnants. The income inequality is not because we have to change any of our current laws. It's just remnants of as you're saying, of the old racist laws in America, which ended up having results, unfortunately, on the culture of minorities.
A lot of very similar practices still happen today. A lot of similar practices are still going on right now.
Most of the racist laws, though,
if you've had a system that's been holding your culture back for hundreds of years, then some of those practices get exposed and publicly shamed and lessened. It's going to take would it not be fair to say it would take an equal amount of time for that culture to catch up?
It would take time. even
Okay.
after all of the racist policies are completely removed. It would still take a certain amount of time for the equality to happen. It's not going to happen overnight.
But the racist policies have not been completely removed.
Well, again, the ones that I'm aware, and we can talk about if there's a racist policy, but in terms of actual laws in the government of people of minorities not being able to drink from the same water fountain, not able to have access to the same education, and all of these things, the most of the really blatant ones that really curved minorities in the past have been removed. You're saying there still are some.
No. Access to capital to start a business.
Again, that's not a legal thing. You're saying that might be a thing banks are doing. That's not a law,
but
though.
The system is wider than just a law.
Okay, I'm agreeing with you because I think what the banks do,
all the capital that exists in the society, the government does not control how it's distributed.
Right. So
they influence it.
I agree with you.
If control how it's distributed.
If banks decide to racially discriminate, then that is a system flaw. But would you agree with me in terms of the legal system? There isn't necessarily most of the things which were holding people of color black in the past do not exist anymore. Just in terms of the law, so then we'll concentrate on where we need our concentration, which you're saying are banks or things like that. I'm happy to get into that.
I think that's a loaded question that because I do not spend a lot of time researching a bunch of laws, I can't completely agree with.
Okay, fair enough. I don't know either. You know what I mean? I'm not a law expert.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to understand a perspective. That's all.
Another big issue going beyond police brutality, right? The court system in this country disproportionately sentences minorities to longer sentences for crimes that their white counterparts commit do not face the same repercussions.
Okay. You know what? This wasn't even one of the questions on my list, but let's actually talk about this now. I can present to you. How about you, since you started this, you present to me what you consider is the unequal laws that are counterparts of each other and they have different sentences. And I kind of know where you're going with this already, and I'm gonna see if I can present the argument of people who say, hey, maybe it's actually not disproportionate, it actually is proportionate, because you'll find a law which is actually more similar, which is equal.
A black guy gets pulled over and has an ounce of weed on him, right?
Yeah.
More than what would be considered for personal use for a short period of time, a day, a week, right? I do know people that can smoke an ounce in a week. I know people that can smoke an ounce in a day, right? But they have an amount of a substance that's personal use. When they have to go through the court system for this, the charges they face are going to be more severe than a white guy who gets pulled over with an ounce of weed, right? But it's more frequent that black people will have to face charges that involve distribution of a narcotic, where a white person will be treated as though it was personal use. And even if they do face the exact same charges, it's up to a judge. If they're both found guilty, it's up to a judge to decide what the punishment is going to be, right? A jury just determines guilt or innocence, doesn't determine what the punishment is going to be. So a white guy in front of a white jury has a better chance of A, being found not guilty, and then B, when it comes time to sentencing, the majority of the judicial system are the prosecutors and the judges are the majority white people, right? White people have a much better chance of facing less repercussions, meaning they end up paying a fine. If they have to do jail time, it's much less severe, more of an opportunity to have some form of reintegration into society via going to jail on weekends, probation, home monitoring, whatever the result is, where a black person facing the same charge could end up with 6 months, a year, 2 years in jail behind committing the same offense that their white counterpart will commit.
Okay.
So
yeah, go ahead. If there's something else, I just have a few. You're saying a lot of things. I'm just gonna ask. Okay, go ahead.
The way laws are written on paper, it might look as though it's equal, but the laws are written to give leeway for how the laws are applied.
Okay, so you're saying the problem is the people applying the laws, not necessarily the way the laws are written in the books itself.
Well, the laws are written in a way to to make it seem as if it's not the law's fault, it's the person applying the law's fault. So you can so that the two can be separated and analyzed in the same fashion that you're going at it.
Are you
Right? The
saying
way
that?
you're looking at it, yeah, the laws are the people who create the laws are absolutely thinking about it this from we're going to be analyzed this way.
Okay, so are you saying the laws should be giving humans less discretion in terms of what a maximum sentence is or a minimum sentence? You should remove the human factor completely, because if you allow there to be a human factor in the legal system, then you're going to end up with people with implicit biases who are going to be treating different people unfairly for whatever reason.
Happening. That's happening. Reforms to sentencing guidelines are happening, but that and here, Fry, are you American? Or are you Canadian?
I grew up in Minnesota, in Minneapolis actually, so I'm Minneapolis native. Right now I live in Canada. I moved to Canada 6 years ago. What?
All right, cool. So you have some knowledge base, so we can.
I'm American citizen. So, I'm a Canadian resident. I can vote for the American election, cannot vote for anything Canadian. So I do consider myself an American.
In the legal system, it's almost like there's two legal systems that function at the same time. There's more than two. There's the federal legal system. There are federal crimes, and then there are state crimes. Now, the federal government can make reforms to sentencing structure of federal crimes, but it is very difficult for the federal government to tell an individual state how to reform that state's policies. That's up to the lawmakers in that state, most of whom are elected officials. So there have been reforms to sentencing structures, but they don't happen at the same rate in every state in the country.
Okay.
So it's very murky to say the laws are equal for all the people, right? Because there's 51 systems. There's 50 states and then the federal system.
Interesting. But for me, when I hear that, I'll go and say, let's find any state or any just district that has unfair laws. Let's identify those ones and try to make them more fair, rather than some people who go and say the laws, just laws of America in general. There's just a lot of systemic racism, even in the legal system.
Well, the reason that there are biased laws is because there are biased people who are elected as lawmakers.
Okay. So you're saying okay. So you're saying when you say biased laws, you're saying they're not necessarily written in a way that are discriminatory, but they leave too much human opinion in it, and that gives them the opportunity to discriminate. Are we on the same page about that part?
Well, okay. Yes. Not only that, minorities also are not playing enough of a role in local elections, right? Like judges are elected, your sheriff is elected, your state comptroller is elected. People are there's not enough involvement with minorities in on the local level, and that is something that minorities need to play a bigger role in stepping up and correcting, right?
Interesting.
I'm not out here saying that only white people can fix all the black people's problems, right? But there has to be, you first have to accept that there are white people who are there are a group of white people who think that it's okay to have their foot on minorities' necks. And then there's a larger group of white people who do not mind if this first group keeps their foot on minorities' necks, as long as they don't want to put their foot on other white people's necks.
If a white person if I would say that there's a large group of black people who just don't care about anyone besides for themselves, that's a hard thing to swallow when you point the finger and blame another person like that. I need evidence before accepting it.
That landscape has to exist in order for this to be a possibility.
What has to exist?
That landscape has to exist in order for this to be a possibility. In order for these things that are happening and that have been happening, the entire landscape needs to be addressed, right? That exists. That is a thing.
That there's a large amount of white people who only care about other white people who don't care about minorities.
It's not that they don't care. They don't care enough to take action.
I think that's true, by the way. I think that is true, by the way, about everyone. That if someone is hurting in the world and it's not someone that they identify with, like a family or a friend or someone from their city. Like for me, I'm more emotional about the things that are happening in Minneapolis because I grew up there. You know what I mean? When I see all the stuff happening, it does have more of an effect on me because there's sort of, it's a part of my identity. So I think you're right, is that if you see there being discrimination and someone says, well, it's happening to people with black skin, I have black skin, I identify as part of my identity, you're much more likely to do something. And you're right. In that same scenario, if people, instead of identifying as I'm a human and that's a human and we all have the same identity, if instead they go and they say I'm white or they say I'm black, it doesn't matter what they say I am the color of my skin and everyone who's not is not part of my identity group, then they're less likely to try to actually protest when people are being of their group are being persecuted in any sort of way. I think that is a problem.
I'll throw this out as a flaw within myself, right? Now, I have heard a lot of how do I find the right words to describe this? The United States Immigration Services has been treating what they deem to be illegal immigrants increasingly more unfairly over the last 30 years. But because I don't interact with that population very much, and I don't have members of my family in that population, I don't have too many friends who are the children of what are deemed illegal immigrants, or I don't hang out with too many people who are deemed or what are illegal immigrants. Their plight is not something that I spend enough time learning about, or when I hear about blatant atrocities, I don't spend very much emotional or mentally energy getting outraged about. And there's, I don't want to say there's nothing ever that will cause me to get up out of this silly chair and go do something to remedy that scenario, but it's something I can't identify with, and I don't put any energy towards changing in the moment because it does not affect me or the people that I socialize with.
Mm-hmm. I agree. This is in general. I mean, this is nothing even to do with race. This is something in general. If people are much more concerned about people who they part of their community, but if they're someone who they consider to be part of a different community, they're a lot less likely to act. Which I don't know if that's a problem. I think there's actually something good about communities that naturally has that effect. And as long as we make sure everyone does have some kind of community that has their back, that's okay on a certain level. But I also think that we as human beings need to be smarter and look at another human being as just that, as being exactly the same as us, and not say because they're a different race or a different skin color or a different place that I don't give a crap about them. So I do think I think the increasing of empathy and increasing of just humankind, I feel like is I think a good remedy to that, and hopefully we'll become more empathetic as a species.
Let's try to be better humans.
Yep. All right.
So are we done unpacking this, or do we want to dig into this deeper? I don't even know if we made it all the way through this second scenario.
The culture thing? What do you mean the second scenario?
Oh, so second scenario.
Do you have anything you want to add? I feel pretty satisfied about it.
The basis of the second statement is that black people are poor because black people just don't try hard enough. Don't try as hard. That's not it. As what you're saying.
That's not what I said, and I want to be so clear. Culture, this is a huge misunderstanding.
It's more ingrained in Asian culture to become a high wage earner than it is in black culture.
See, this is a huge misunderstanding because there are many. I'm sure there's some people who do that. People love pointing fingers and blaming people. You know what I mean? So that is a problem, and that's a problem. That's a flaw in in just human nature. So there is a group of people, I'm sure, who do that. But I'm coming from the perspective of not trying to point fingers and blame anybody. I'm just trying to explain statistics, actually, without blaming anyone. I'm really trying to take the blame off of racial bias and just say it's the unfortunate circumstance when you have a large population who is shipped to a country against their will on boats and not allowed to have any property, and they are property, that it's just going to take a little time. But it's not because there's some major bias happening now that's causing this. I'm actually trying to remove the blame, not add more. I'm certainly not blaming
but I mean,
minorities for being poor. I'm not in that business at all. I'm just saying
But
it's
the
a
statement
cultural
was
thing.
there's something in Asian culture in America where Asians end up being they end up finding themselves in high wage earning positions at a higher rate than black culture.
Again, a certain
That's
amount of
what the
that.
statement was.
Again, so but even in that statement, let me explain. A certain amount of that, I'm not going to try to take away credit from individual choices that will amount to that. Someone tries really, really hard and they do well in school and they make more money. I'm not going to take that away, but I'm also not going to give the individuals the complete credit because they are privileged to have had parents who are very strict on them in school, and they come from a culture that just sort of has that ingrained. So, the same way, I'm not going to blame, let's say, black people for the culture because it's not their fault. I'm also not going to give all the credit to anything about Asian culture that makes them make more money. I'm not putting blame. I'm just saying that it's not necessarily based on discrimination. That's all I'm
Good, because I think
suggesting.
there are a pair of fallacies in there. One that on average Asians are higher wage earners than all their other counterparts. I don't think that's actually accurate.
You don't think it's true?
And no, I don't think that.
We'd have to double check the statistic. I have heard that a lot of times, though. I mean, I've heard that from a lot of sources, but you're right. I don't know.
I think that's just a stereotype. I think that's just a stereotype.
I mean, do you want me to look it up? I can look it up.
We need to get another accounting of these numbers, right? I think these might be statistics that were taken in the 70s and 80s, right? Late 70s, early 80s, some time period like that, and are not truly representative of Asian culture today. And if they are outpacing, it's like a marginal amount. And B, is that even truly a thing? Like the Tiger Mom stereotype might not nearly be as prevalent amongst all the entire collection of Asians as popular culture makes it out to be.
That could be true. That impression, stereotypes are often skewed. With like, I'm just trying to look up right now on Google and try to actually find a source. Do you know anything about the about the PGPF, the Peter G. Peterson Foundation, who does these sort of surveys?
I've never heard of it.
Let's try to find something
we've
both heard
Peter
of, though.
G. Peterson. I do want to look at this. What is it called? Peter B. Peterson?
Just look up. The thing I Googled was average household income by race USA 2017. They're actually giving me for 2018 here. And it says this one claims that in 2018, the median household income for Asians was $87,000 and for white, non-Hispanic, was $70,000. I can look at the next one. We can look at Wikipedia. Again, I don't know where they get their numbers, but it also says the same thing, 87,000 for Asians, 70,000 for white. I'll look at the next source, which will be Statista.com. I don't know. I don't know any of these things, but it says Asians 87 and Caucasians white. Every single source so far on Google, which again, we don't know each of them individually, but they're all saying the exact same number, that in 2018, Asian households were making $87,000 per year on average, and white households were making $70,000. Okay. I can keep looking for more. So it would be really weird if all of these statistics were off and they all said the exact same thing at the same time. It's possible. Maybe they all got their information from the same wrong statistic, but I've heard this enough that I don't think this is a complete just urban legend. I think this is a thing. And I think if you even look at like college at university admins, stuff like this, there's a disproportionate amount of Asians getting into universities than the population. Just go to the U of T. You should see it's a lot of people of Asian descent.
Why are the Asian people beating all the white guys though? What's up with that? What are the white guys
doing
wrong?
Culture.
That the Asian people are outpacing them.
They have part of their culture being very disciplined. They have part of their culture that's what's important. It doesn't mean it's a good thing, by the way. Being super one-minded and schools everything, and then when you're in your job too, you have to see. Let's say these people, the entrepreneurs, and they literally have no life. Bill Gates was sleeping under his desk while he was building Microsoft every night. He had no. It's not necessarily better to be richer. I think a person who just has a very basic income and has everything they need and actually has a freaking life could be, it's not necessarily better to just be more rich. So these average income households aren't a negative thing towards the races that have less. It could mean they just have different priorities. I'm not gonna say it's objectively better to just have a more higher average income. You know, that's
All
the
right, good.
point. I'm
Because
trying not to
I
blame.
was just playing devil's advocate.
I'm trying not to make it. It's fine. I'm totally cool with devil advocate. I'm a philosopher. You know what I mean? So that's what I do.
All
But
right.
I don't like when you just blaming. You know what I mean? Even the thing. I don't blame even the fact that there's more, let's say, black people get killed by police than white people proportionally to population. I really would dislike anyone who points a finger at black people and say they're to blame. I think that's ridiculous. I don't think there's any purpose in even doing that. And even if it was a purpose, you'd have the onus would be on them to prove that. You know? And I think that's going to be a very, very difficult thing to prove.
I like how you wrap that up.
Okay. I'm glad we're actually seeing a lot of these things in similar ways, and we're recognizing where our differences are, and we're agreeing to disagree. Like I feel like I wish there was so much more conversation like this and so much less debating. Someone was asking in the Twitch chat over here, are they debating or agreeing? We're explaining what our differences of opinion. We're trying to understand where each other are coming from. Like that's how communication is. You know, that's how communication should be. Not all the people on the freaking. You see people debate politics. They're just yelling their ideas at each other, not trying to understand where each other are coming from. This is what really this channel, the Deep Fry, is all about. This is why I made it, because I feel like there has to be more reasonable dialogue and less angry. Again, I'm not even blaming the people who do that. People are angry. People are scared. It's hard to keep it cool. It's hard to reason with a person you consider to be a threat. But that's why you need a lot of people who are less angry and less scared to have a voice as well. You know, both. You need both. Do you want me to throw one more question at you?
Let's do it.
We'll throw one more devil's advocate, one more philosophy at you, and we'll call it a day. Again, super hard question here. I'm about to ask you. Why does Black Lives Matter focus so much on the amount of black people killed by white police officers, but they're not making that same noise about black people who get killed by other black people, which is so disproportionately more than black people who are killed by white people? If Black Lives Matter, why don't they focus on why are they making it a race issue at all? You could just say black, but why are you focusing on the thing which is killing such a small percentage of homicide victims in the United States every year?
Wait. Why do you think it's your place to tell Black Lives Matter what they should focus on?
Well,
they picked an issue, and that's the issue they choose to focus on. Why is that a problem? I'm sure Black Lives Matter, the members of Black Lives Matter are fully aware of other issues within the black community, but this is the issue that they want to fix first. Why is that a problem for you?
Interesting. To me personally, that's not a problem as long as there would be an organization creating the same amount of noise and same amount of awareness, or more actually, of black homicide victims just in general from the civilians instead of from the police. So I don't have a problem with the noise.
If you want to carry that torch, then you want that torch to be carried. Why don't you pick up that torch and run with it?
I am.
Black Lives Matter.
I'm trying to do as many things as I can. That's why I'm a freaking person who's. I've never suffered from. I've had anti-Semitism in my life a little bit, but it's not a huge part of my life. It's just every once in a while. It's not like a huge thing. But I hear people and I empathize, and that's why I'm spending time talking about racism, because I care about other people. You're right. So I appreciate your answer.
So you've identified another issue within the black community, right? Yeah. If you want there to be activism around that issue, then people need to create it. Why don't you create it instead of worrying about the issue that Black Lives Matter do carry?
That's a great question. That's a great answer. Today. I think you're saying a great answer. I think that's, again, this is a concern people have. And you're saying just because honestly, you're making a deal about one issue, which is a problem, and there's a bigger issue, doesn't mean that this is not an issue. I want to extend that to
the rest of the conservative community who wants to fall behind that criticism to discount what Black Lives Matter is doing.
The rest, I'm not conservative, by the way. I'm a very independent.
No, but that is 100% a conservative.
But you're saying that isn't. No, this is something that conservatives do say. They're like, why are you focusing on police officers? Why are you attacking us? Let's say people, even the police community. Why are you attacking us? Spending that energy on this? It's such a small problem compared to a much bigger problem. That's how people, when they get defensive, this is kind of thing.
Clearly, it's not such a small problem
in comparison. In comparison,
this argument is trying to it's framed in a way to discount the torch that Black Lives Matter is picking up and running with, as best that they can figure out how to do.
I hear what you're saying, and I agree with you. I do think that this is probably unfortunately making people less aware of police brutality than they really should. And I actually agree with you 100%. All right. Satisfied? Soul, thank you so much for coming on. We've been doing this podcast for a little while. You are the first guest. I would like to keep having guests on. This was great. I really, really like this conversation. I really appreciate hearing your perspective. I love just hearing people who have a different look on life and hear what they have to say. I wish this was the general attitude, but maybe we can make that happen,
Well, thanks for having me.
And thank you so much.
Good luck. We got to get you better guests than me, though.
No, I think that was great. And I'll keep on looking for guests. So this was great. If you guys want to check out Soul, he plays a little small stream, but it's really chill and it's really fun. If you want to see him play Rust and Last Day on Earth and like survival games, and some other things too, you can check out his channel, twitch.tv/s0ulc0ntr0ller, but all the O's are zeros. Thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Everybody, thanks for hanging out and watching this. Whenever you want to do this again, let me know, Fred.
Amazing.